The rust flaked from the edges of the command console, drifting weightless in the stale air like dying embers. The oath had been sealed here once long before the hull scars, before the decks reeked of burnt flesh and leaking coolant, before humanity's pride had rotted into survival's last desperate whisper. Now, in the dim glow of failing tactical displays, that oath was little more than a ghost, bound to fractured steel and a crew too stubborn to die. Outside the reinforced viewport, the wreck of a XL Kern harvester tumbled through the void, its gutted spine dragging a thread of twisted debris across the starlight. What passed for silence on the black ship was the low growl of the reactor feeding power into broken systems, a heartbeat too faint to trust, but too steady to doubt. Every console flickered with patched code lines rewritten by human hands and alien corruption alike, fused into something neither side could fully claim. A low chime rippled through the deck, warning of incoming gravitic signatures. No alarms screamed. They couldn't afford noise anymore. Every second the black ship stayed dark and quiet was a second the enemy might overlook them, mistaking the ship for another drifting corpse in the endless graveyard the war had made of this sector. In the heart of tactical command, a gaunt figure traced a finger along the worn edge of the console, brushing against the very words that had bound the crew to this fight etched there with a combat knife after the first battle cost them half the ship. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. It wasn't poetry. It was a demand, one they had obeyed for too many cycles to count. The oath was rust now, corroded by time, by loss, by compromises that had rewritten both the ship and the souls aboard it. Implants flickered behind tired eyes, streaming fractured sensor data into neural feeds, painting a picture of encroaching death with brutal clarity. The XL Kern were close. Too close. Their biometal hulls shimmered on the edge of detection, waiting for the kill signal. Somewhere in that void, something larger loomed, something the oath had warned of when it was still sharp and clean, before rust swallowed belief. A comm burst rattled through the encrypted channel, nothing but static and a single coded pulse. A call sign lost to history. A ghost from a battle no one survived. The oath had been rusted, yes, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. The black ship was ready to bleed again. The rusted oath stretched across the console like a scar that refused to close, its edges worn thin from years of desperate hands slamming controls, tracing battle reports, and wiping blood that never fully washed away. It had been carved into the metal by the first commander who took the black ship into this cursed war, a vow made with a combat knife dulled against XL Kern armor, the kind of oath no fleet regulation ever sanctioned but every surviving officer obeyed. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. Back then, it still meant something. Back when they believed survival was a matter of grit and firepower. Back before the ship itself began to change. Grithin's fingers hovered over the words, though he barely registered the sensation. Neural links fed raw data into his skull faster than conscious thought could follow sensor sweeps, returning fractured echoes, corrupted bursts from long-range optics, painting the void in glitching static and spectral outlines. His pulse hammered against the metal implants, tracing his forearm, a subtle reminder that his own body had been rewritten almost as thoroughly as the ship. Born on a forgotten mining world, Griffin had once believed the stars meant freedom. When the XL Kern came, freedom lasted exactly 11 minutes, the time it took for orbital defenses to buckle and for the atmosphere to catch fire. The black ship had found him after that, a half-burned husk of a teenager scavenging scrap from his own colony's dead fleet. They rebuilt him in the way only desperate soldiers could, cutting away soft tissue for hardened augments, threading command protocols directly into his cortical node so orders could bypass thought and become reflex. Every pulse of light in the command deck flickered somewhere inside his brain now. Every vibration of the hull trembled against his bones. He was the ship as much as it was him. Beside him, the silent weight of Helix leaned against the rail, exoskeletal armor humming softly where fractured plates tried to regenerate. Helix had once been something close to human, a soldier bred from military stock, gene-mapped for endurance and reflex, intended to be nothing more than another body to throw at the front. But after the Harrowfield collapse, Keelix had been left behind, stranded in vacuum for 6 weeks, with only a failing suit and a dead squad for company. When the black ship found him, the suit had fused to his flesh, a second skin bound so deeply to his nervous system that no med team dared cut it away. Now, the armor had a voice of its own, whispering telemetry and damage reports into Keelix's skull even when he tried to sleep. No one knew if the voice belonged to the ship, the suit, or something else entirely. Keelix stopped asking years ago. A warning pulse shivered through the deck. Proximity signature. Not 1. 5. No. 7. Patterns too sharp, movements too clean, XL Kern hunters. Grithin didn't speak. Keelix didn't need orders. The oath was their language now. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. Across the deck, Lissith knelt before an open maintenance panel, one hand buried elbow-deep in the ship's neural conduit, the other holding a field scalpel meant for living tissue. Her fingers moved like a surgeon performing surgery on a patient too stubborn to die and too dangerous to sedate. Lissith was no engineer. She was a gene weaver once, a scientist tasked with adapting humanity's failing biology to the realities of deep space warfare. When the black ship pulled her from the wreckage of the Daryon Spire, she'd already rewritten her own genome twice, replacing fragile bone with lattice carbon struts and fusing her sensory cortex to an adaptive subnet that let her see electromagnetic fields the way others saw light. Now, her eyes glowed with soft pulses that matched the ship's failing heartbeat. Lissith didn't speak to the crew anymore unless absolutely necessary. She spoke to the ship instead, murmuring half-forgotten lullabies from the pre-war archives, songs meant to calm frightened children before sleep. The black ship wasn't a child. It was older than any war record could trace, found drifting in the void long before humanity realized the XL Kern existed. No one knew who built it. No one knew why. But the ship remembered things no human mind could hold: patterns in radiation storms, whispers in gravitic distortion, signals buried in the blood static that sometimes filled the comm channels when no one was transmitting. Lissith understood just enough to know the ship wasn't sane, but it wanted to fight. And that was enough. The proximity alert sharpened. Contact imminent. Grithin blinked twice, cycling the tactical overlay directly into his visual field. The black ship's exterior sensors painted ghostly outlines across his vision, 7 hunters closing fast, their organic hulls shedding fragments of hardened chitin to accelerate. XL Kern technology was closer to biology than machinery. Every vessel, a living thing grown for war, its systems a blend of engineered tissue and parasitic intelligence. The hunters pulsed with low-level psychic noise, a side effect of their neural lattice adapting to the void. It sounded like a distant scream, stretched thin across light years. Keelix moved first, heavy boots magnetizing to the deck as his armor shifted modes, combat plating unfolding from his spine like a mechanical exoskeleton, servo clusters snapping into place around his limbs. Lissith didn't flinch. She drove the scalpel deeper into the conduit, splicing raw command code into the ship's ancient nervous system. Somewhere deep within the hull, a forgotten weapon system stirred. The oath rusted, yes, but it was still sharp enough to cut. Grithin's voice cut across the deck, flat and calm despite the rising tension. Initiate drift shroud. Full thermal masking. Minimal pulse emissions. The black ship didn't need engines to move when the hull could bleed momentum from fractured space-time itself. A trick the XL Kern still hadn't figured out. The hunters swept closer, unaware their prey had already vanished into the folds of space itself. Keelix braced against the bulkhead, hands gripping weapons grown directly from the black ship's own structure. No 2 guns on this vessel matched. Everyone had been scavenged, rebuilt, modified, corrupted. Plasma lances sharing circuits with graviton disruptors, rail cannons fused with bioelectric coil arrays salvaged from XL Kern carcasses. Each trigger pull was a gamble. Every shot might save them or tear the deck apart. Lissith whispered to the ship again, her voice threading through the commnet like smoke. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. The ship whispered back, ancient language twisting through the static, words half lost to time. Grithin didn't understand the translation, but he felt the meaning crawl beneath his skin. The black ship remembered something no human had survived long enough to explain. The hunters reached attack range. Griffin gave no order. He didn't have to. The oath had already spoken. Calyx fired first, plasma lances tearing through the void in jagged arcs. One hunter split apart instantly, its organic hull rupturing in a burst of superheated vapor. The others twisted in response, their shapes flowing and reforming mid-flight, limbs and weapons growing from nothing in response to the threat. The black ship fired next. Not a weapon, but a scream broadcast through every frequency the hunters could detect. A scream built from every death the ship had ever witnessed, every broken oath, every final breath of every crew that had fought and died within its walls. The hunters faltered, their psychic lattice shuddering under the weight of borrowed memory. Lysith's hands trembled, blood seeping from her fingertips where the scalpel cut too deep. Calyx didn't stop firing, his armor feeding on the ship's scream, amplifying it through his own neural link until his very presence became a weapon. Griffin stood silent, fingers tracing the rusted words on the console one final time before issuing the only command that mattered. Close the distance. Board them. Take their hearts. The oath had never been about survival. It was about making sure the enemy remembered why humanity was worth fearing. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. And if the dawn never came, bleed until nothing was left to fear. The rust flaked from the console, carried into the air like dying embers, and the black ship plunged into the heart of the enemy formation, with all the fury of a ghost that had died too many times to care about dying again. The fractured relay buried deep within the black ship's underdeck pulsed erratically, its signals failing to sync with the main command grid. It had been malfunctioning for days, cycling through corrupted data archives and spitting fragments of encrypted logs into the secondary network messages that had no sender, no timestamp, no record of origin. At first, no one noticed. Glitches were common in a vessel this old, a war machine patched together from ancient technology and scavenged alien systems. But when the messages started responding to crew movements, when doors sealed themselves a split second before anyone could enter, when supply manifests rewrote themselves to list equipment no one remembered loading, even the most hardened veterans started to wonder if something had finally broken. For good. In the maintenance crawl space, Kethron worked alone, a tool pack strapped to their back, fingers stained with synthetic oil and polymer dust. Kethron wasn't part of the command crew. They were a soldier, not in the way Calyx was. They weren't a scientist like Lysith or a tactician like Griffin. Kethron's job was simpler: keep the ship's life support running, patch leaks before the air boiled away, reroute power when the main grid failed. They were a survivor, dragged aboard years ago after a failed boarding mission left them floating in an escape pod with a severed arm and a cracked helmet. The black ship had rebuilt them, of course, arm replaced with a grafted limb scavenged from alien wreckage, a skeletal frame reinforced with adaptive alloy, lungs partially replaced with some sort of organ that filtered toxic atmospheres without anyone ever explaining what it was or where it came from. Kethron didn't ask questions. Asking questions got people killed. But the messages were different. They felt personal. Lines of text scrawled across their visor while they worked, flickering into existence when no one else was looking. Sometimes they were warnings, a bulkhead stress fracture 5 minutes before the hull gave way. Sometimes they were memories, fragments of past battles Kethron had never fought, names of crew members who died before they ever came aboard. And sometimes they were just a single word, repeated endlessly in every language the ship's translator knew. Betrayal. Kethron didn't believe in ghosts. The black ship was haunted. Everyone knew that. But haunted was just a word for things people couldn't explain. What mattered was fixing the relay before another glitch sealed off an oxygen line or vented the barracks into vacuum. They crawled deeper into the conduit, microdrones buzzing around their head, scanning for heat leaks and structural cracks. The air tasted metallic, faintly charged with ionization that had no business being in a sealed compartment. The deeper Kethron crawled, the louder the static grew inside their skull. The relay wasn't broken. It was rewriting itself. Tendrils of biosynthetic wiring spread across the walls like veins, pulsing faintly in time with the ship's heartbeat. This wasn't human engineering. This was XL Kern tech grown, not built. Someone had spliced alien systems directly into the ship's core network, hiding the graph beneath layers of false data. Catherine's fingers twitched, instinct urging them to pull back, seal the conduit, report the breach. But the messages scrawled again. One stood out. Do not alert command. Not safe. Catherine had no reason to trust a ghost message, but they also had no reason to trust command. Loyalty was earned on the Black Ship, and no one earned it clean. Every officer had secrets. Every survivor had debts unpaid. Catherine rerouted the diagnostic feed to a private channel, locking it behind encryption codes no one knew they had. They'd learned to hide things early, after waking up with an alien arm and no explanation, after finding their service record rewritten to list the birth date that didn't match their memory. The Black Ship did things to people. It rewrote bodies, minds, even identities. And now, it was rewriting itself. Further down the conduit, a pulse beacon flickered, a tiny, egg-shaped device half sunk into the wall like it had grown there naturally. Catherine reached for it, fingers brushing its surface. The metal felt warm, almost alive. Neural contact triggered a data flood, raw memories pouring into Catherine's skull, fragments of sensor logs, tactical overlays, voices screaming over dead comm channels. A boarding party. Not XL Kern. Human. Wearing old Earth fleet insignia, long obsolete. They breached the Black Ship's hull from within, cutting through bulkheads with plasma torches, moving with surgical precision. They knew the layout. They knew the defenses. They came for something buried in the core, something older than the war itself. The last memory was the worst. One of the boarders removed their helmet, revealing a face Catherine recognized. Not because they knew them personally, but because they'd seen that face in the old crew archives, the first commander of the Black Ship, the one who carved the rusted oath into the console. Except this couldn't be right. That commander died centuries ago, lost in the void after the ship's first catastrophic engagement. The record said the body was never recovered. But here they were, alive or something close enough to alive to walk, speak, and bleed. Catherine jerked back, severing the neural link. The beacon dissolved into liquid metal, seeping into the conduit wall until no trace remained. The messages flickered again. Find her. Stop her. Do not trust the bridge. Catherine didn't understand what it meant, but they knew one thing: if the Black Ship's first commander was still alive, if they had led a boarding party against their own vessel, then nothing about this war was what it seemed. They crawled back toward the main deck, mind racing. Who could they tell? Griffin would execute them for even suggesting a ghost crew existed. Calyx trusted nothing that couldn't bleed. Lysith would want to dissect their brain to find the source of the data feed. No one on the Black Ship was safe. No one had ever been safe. The rusted oath was a lie. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. But what if the dawn had never been theirs to see? What if the line they held was never meant to protect humanity at all? As they reached the hatch, a shadow blocked the exit. Not Calyx. Not Griffin. A figure wrapped in a cloak made from the same biosynthetic mesh that lined the conduit, face obscured by a helmet fused directly to their skull. The figure raised one hand, fingers split into delicate filaments that glowed with the same pulsating light as the ship's neural veins. No words. Just a gesture: stay silent, follow me. Catherine's heart hammered, but they obeyed. They had no choice. The figure led them through back passages no human should have known existed, cutting through maintenance ducts and forgotten service bays that hadn't been used since the ship was first salvaged. Along the way, Catherine saw things they weren't meant to see: chambers filled with dormant machinery that twitched like sleeping bodies, walls etched with alien script that pulsed in time with human heartbeats. This wasn't just a warship. This was something older, something built to hold a secret too dangerous to bury and too deadly to reveal. The figure stopped before a sealed hatch, pressing their hand to the surface. The metal dissolved, revealing a chamber bathed in cold light. In the center, a cryopod, ancient, predating every known human design. Inside, A woman's body perfectly preserved, wearing the insignia of the first Black ship crew. Her face matched the one Kethron saw in the memory feed, but her eyes were open, staring directly at them through the glass. The messages flickered one last time. She betrayed us all. Now you choose wake her, or seal the truth forever. Kethron's hand hovered over the control panel, heart pounding. Somewhere above, the Black ship shuddered, a distant explosion rattling through the hull. Battle raged on. But down here, in the forgotten heart of the vessel, the real war was only beginning. Kethron took a breath, fingers trembling over the controls. Whatever choice they made, the rusted oath would never mean the same again. Hold the line. Bleed for the last dawn. But whose dawn? And whose blood? What the hell is this supposed to mean? Kethron's voice came out strained, barely above a whisper. As they stared at the cryopod, the figure beside them said nothing, their helmeted head tilted slightly, like they were listening to something only they could hear. Kethron felt their skin crawl cold sweat beating along the edge of their grafted arm. This can't be real. She's been dead for centuries. I saw the records, we all saw the records, everyone on this ship knows her story. Records lie. The figure's voice was mechanical, distorted layers of human speech and alien harmonics woven into a single unnatural sound. Kethron swallowed hard, staring at the woman inside the pod, her face peaceful, too peaceful for someone who supposedly died screaming into the void when the Black ship first disappeared. Why show me this? Why now? Kethron's voice cracked. Part of them didn't want the answer, but the figure stepped closer, fingers brushing the pod's surface, as though it might dissolve just like the walls. The truth is awake. Now you found the beacon, you touched the nerve. The ship knows you see it now, and it won't let you forget. Kethron stumbled back, boots scraping against metal. I don't want to know. I didn't sign up for this. I fix pipes, I patch wires, I don't dig up ghosts. The figure's head tilted again. Not a ghost, something worse. The ship trembled, a distant burst, shaking the deck overhead, weapons fire echoing through the conduits. Kethron could hear the faint chatter of comm channels screaming orders, overlapping chaotic bridge. Must be under siege again. Or maybe another boarding attempt. None of that mattered now. What did she do? Kethron's voice was almost pleading. What did the first commander do to deserve this? The figure's hand pressed against the pod again. This time a new message flickered across Kethron's visor. Hand-scrawled text, messy, erratic. Not the clean system fonts the ship normally used. She opened the door, she made the pact, she turned the key. Kethron's throat tightened. You mean she's the reason for all this? The war, the corruption, the whispers that get into your head? The figure gave no answer, just that endless mechanical silence. Kethron slammed their fist against the nearest bulkhead. Damn it. Answer me, what did she bargain away? What did we lose in that deal? The air in the chamber felt too thin, breathing suddenly. Took effort. The ship knows, the figure said at last. It knows you're asking questions. It knows you're too close. Then help me fix this. Kethron's voice cracked again, trembling with something between fear and rage. If this ship is still fighting this war because of her, because of whatever deal she made, then tell me how to end it. The figure hesitated, a long pause as though weighing something heavy against something fragile. Then they reached up, fingers unsealing the edges of their helmet, pulling it free. Kethron expected a face, expected scars or alien implants, or something horrific. Instead they saw themselves. It wasn't a mirror, it was worse. An older version, face weathered, skin pale, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years, hair streaked with silver veins faintly glowing beneath translucent skin. This can't be, Kethron whispered. But the other them just smiled, grim and tired. It always ends like this. The shit loops us through. Each time one of us asks too many questions, one of us finds the truth. We become the guide. The next version follows the same path until we break it or we break ourselves. Kethron's legs buckled, knees hitting metal. This is a nightmare. This isn't real. It's the only real thing left. The older Kethron reached out, grabbing their wrist, hard fingers digging into flesh. Your choices are simple. You wake her, you ask her what she knows, you break the loop, or you bury her. You seal the truth and let the next you stumble into this mess all over again. Kethron yanked their hand free, voice shaking. I'm not you. I'm not ending up like this. You already have. You already will. The ship groaned beneath their feet, another explosion rippling through the deck. Plating, Kethron could hear Calyx's voice distantly barking orders on the comm, but it all felt too far away, too small compared to this. Why me? Catherine whispered, not even expecting an answer. But the other them answered anyway, because you're the one who never stops fixing things, and this ship is broken. Kethron pressed their forehead against the cryopod's glass, staring into the face of the woman who started it, all her eyes still closed, her breathing faint and steady.